AASHTO T255 and ASTM C566 are the standard method of test for total evaporable moisture of aggregates by drying. To perform this test, we'll need a balance accurate to 0.1 grams, a container large enough to hold the sample. You will also need an oven or some other form of heat, such as a hot plate. We will now review the steps of ASTM C566 and AASHTO T255. Once again, these steps come directly from the technician's handbook. When testing for moisture, we want to ensure that the sample that we obtain is representative of all of the aggregate. Be sure to obtain a sample at least as large as that required in AASHTO T255 Table 1. Finally, make sure that you have a container large enough to hold this size sample. You now need to record the mass of the sample. Also, make sure that you record the weight of the container that the sample is in. For our example, let's assume that the mass of our empty container is 201.1 grams, while the mass of our container plus the sample is 702.8 grams, making the mass of our moist sample 501.7 grams. We now want to dry our sample by heat. Avoid overheating, scorching, or any other alteration of the aggregate particles during the drying process. If a hot plate is used, stir the sample uniformly, ensuring that no sample is lost during the stirring process. Make successive readings to ensure that the sample has dried sufficiently. The sample is dried sufficiently when we have less than 0.1% loss in successive readings. We now want to allow the sample to cool and record the mass to the nearest 0.1 gram. We now want to record our data promptly. Again, the data that we'll need is the mass of the empty container as well as the mass of the now dry sample in the container. For our example, the weight of the empty container should not change, so let's list that at 201.1 grams. And let's assume that the mass of the dry sample and the container is now 691.7 grams, giving us a mass of just the dry sample of 490.6 grams. Before we proceed, let's review our moist sample weights. Again, the container weighed 201.1 grams. The weight of the container plus the moist sample weighed 702.8 grams, giving us a weight of just the moist sample of 501.7 grams. And for our dry sample, the container was 201.1 grams, while the mass of the dry sample with the container was 691.7 grams, giving us a mass of just the dry sample of 490.6 grams. We can now go ahead and do our calculation for total evaporable moisture. We get this by taking the moist sample weight and subtracting from it the dry sample weight, and then dividing this number by the dry sample weight and multiplying that by 100. Here is the calculation as it appears in the ACI Technician's Handbook. So if we go ahead and plug in our numbers, our equation should start like this: 501.7 grams minus 490.6 grams divided by 490.6 grams. And we should get 11.1 divided by 490.6, and this should give us 0.023, and 0.023 times 100 should give us 2.3% total evaporable moisture. Lastly, we want to calculate our total surface moisture. This is the moisture that can affect our concrete mixtures. We get this by simply taking the total evaporable moisture and subtracting from it the absorption content. In this case, let's assume that our absorption is 1.1%. Again, we had a total evaporable moisture of 2.3%. 2.3 minus 1.1 gives us a total surface moisture of 1.2%. And this concludes AASHTO T255 and ASTM C566, total evaporable moisture of aggregates by drying. Right ahead are the review steps for this procedure. And finally, perform your calculations. Finally, there are no significant differences between AASHTO and ASTM for this procedure.